It's Nunno, Executive Leadership Research, and it's my pleasure to have the opportunity to share with you a brand new research study that I affectionately call C-Suite Dynamics, Function or Dysfunction. So one of two things will actually happen today for you. Number one, you may actually recognize that you're working in a C-suite that is highly functional, and you'll feel really good about yourself and reinforced. You may decide you're working in a C-suite which is less functional. And hopefully you will leave here feeling better about yourself because you will realize you are not alone. Right? You are not alone. Being in any C-suite is a significant challenge. Managing the dynamics as members move in and out and as you deal with competing business pressures is not easy on the best of days. So today we'll explore questions about the C-suite dynamic. Because as excellent as you may be as a CIO and an IT leader and an IT executive, no leader functions alone. And the dynamic in the C-suite can either make you stronger and better and lead to a high-performing team, or members of the C-suite can accidentally get in each other's way. And this study is intended to help explore these dynamics of, as a member of that team, can you say the difficult things? Does your group make decisions well? And very importantly, how does the CEO lead? As an integral part of the study, it's impossible to separate the CEO from the culture and dynamic of the executive leadership team. So we asked executive leadership team members a variety of questions about the CEO and how that impacts the dynamic. This study, just completed in the months before this event, includes respondents from 140 C-level executives globally, not just CIOs. We surveyed C-level IT leaders such as CISOs, chief digital officers, but we also included CFOs, COOs, CMOs, chief legal officers, to find out how the group was functioning as a whole. One of the most important parameters of the study was that anyone who was included in the study was required to be a direct report of the CEO, because we wanted to study the dynamic at the executive table. So we were targeting very specifically executives who reported to the CEO. We asked how they worked with each other, and our primary objective was to understand what led to better business performance. Not only a high-performing executive team, but how did that translate or not into higher business performance, in particular, better financials. The survey respondents came from all around the world. Approximately a third came from the EMEA region. A wide variety of industries. You can see the distribution here. Pardon me, the greatest number from manufacturing and financial services, and including retail, healthcare, and a variety of other qualifying industries. And we focused primarily on larger enterprises starting at $1 billion in revenue and above, and approximately 40% of the respondents were enterprises of $10 billion and above. So we were looking very heavily at larger enterprise executive dynamics. We asked a variety of questions about how well performing is your enterprise. So we asked them to rate themselves relative to peers and competitors in their industry. How well were you doing relative to revenue, operating margins, asset utilization, customer experience, on and on. And we essentially asked them, are you performing better than your peers or worse than your peers? Very straightforwardly, are your financials better relative to revenue? Are your margins better? And then we divided the respondents into high and low performers. For the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to loosely refer to them as functional and dysfunctional. So the functional ones were better performers in their industries. They were leaders. They were more highly competitive. They were ahead of the pack. And the dysfunctional were functioning behind their industry and the pack. So you'll see me throughout this session compare the high and low performers. This is how it was done. So I wanted to be very clear that we were actually looking at business performance rather than simply, are you getting on well as an executive team? Because if getting on well as an executive team did not translate into performance, we considered that dysfunctional. So we asked a variety of questions. One of the first questions we asked is, how much time do you spend together and in what format? This has been a subject of discussion among many CIOs. How much face time are we getting? Should we be working hybrid, remote? What should the format be? So interestingly enough, you see this distribution. The majority of executive teams are doing a blend. Very few are functioning primarily in person. Most are doing a bit of a blend. And when we actually split the data by high and low performers, what we found was where they were located when they interacted actually didn't matter. There was a very small distribution, a very small difference, where high performers spent slightly more time in person, and lower performers spent slightly more time remotely. So if you as a CIO are feeling you need more face time, and you feel that the company in some ways is struggling, you're probably right about that. Right? If you are feeling the need that we have to have more face time, then engage more heavily. Find opportunities to be in person. But if you're finding that we're remote, the company's doing well, we have a healthy dynamic, even if you're spending a lot of time remote, you're probably doing the right thing. We also looked at frequency of interaction. How often were members of the ELT seeing each other? So one of the metrics we looked at was, how frequently is the entire executive leadership team, right, the management board, how often are they meeting all together? And you can see the distribution here. The most common frequency was monthly, and the next common was weekly. Then we asked them, how often are you communicating with the CEO? And we were quite specific. It was just any information exchange. In person, email, text, smoke signal, we didn't care. But how often are you having an exchange with the CEO? And what we found was 18% daily, 52% weekly, and 23% monthly. You can see there's this unfortunate 1%. 1% said never. Never. I'm pretty sure that's dysfunctional. I'm pretty sure if you're reporting to the CEO and you never speak to the CEO, that's somewhat problematic. It would be hard for me to make any other research conclusion relative to that. But we actually did find a very small percentage who said that. And then the cadence of communication with other members of the executive leadership team. So 32% daily, 45% monthly, and 19% weekly, right, with a small percentage otherwise. Now, this was the interesting element of when we cut the data by high and low performer, there was no difference, which was kind of interesting to us. There was no difference in the frequency with which the members of the ELT in high and low performing enterprises met. So what does it tell us? It's about what's said in the meetings. It's the quality of the meetings. It's the content of the meetings and how they are run. The one interesting exception to that was when we broke out the data by roles, those who had IT-related C-level roles, CIOs, CISOs, chief digital officers, actually met more frequently than any other C-suite member. Right? And when we think about that, it makes sense. You're working on so many things that touch every other member of the executive team that it actually makes sense that IT executives are interacting much more frequently than, say, the CFO or the chief legal officer than anyone else in the C-suite. So what really matters is the dynamic and how we all interact with one another. We also asked them if they were spending enough time together, enough time with each other. So we, in many ways, cared a little bit less about the hours. We cared more about the perception of, are we spending enough time with one another? And generally, almost all members of the executive team felt they were spending enough time with one another. And in a small percentage of cases, they said we're spending much too little time, or in a small percentage, way too much time, we need to talk to these people much less. What I encourage you to do as CIOs and IT executives is look at your calendar and say, how many of these sessions am I spending with the ELT? Are we collaborating? Am I comfortable with the output of those meetings? Are they worth my time? And how can I make them more valuable? How can I adjust? Look at your calendar from that perspective and really determine, is this the right way for me to be spending my time, or do I need to make some individual adjustments here? We also asked, what's the content broadly of how you're spending your time? One of these dimensions was how much time the team spent analyzing external disruptions and opportunities. They said just enough. And how much time on operational issues How many of you would say too much? How many would say too much? Quite a number of you. So you're quite consistent with this, too much time on operational issues. And I think it's incredibly important, particularly from the CIO perspective, to look at your portfolio of work and say, how much time are we as a team spending on operational issues? Do we need to reorient towards finding more and more opportunities for growth and mission enhancement instead? Because the executive team as a whole is feeling that. So what really matters? What really matters? If it's not necessarily time, right? Time or dimensions around frequency, then what is it? You know this, it's the CEO. The CEO matters tremendously. We asked all of the respondents what the best traits and qualities of their CEO were. We gave them a list of 14 traits and characteristics to choose from. To be clear, all of them were nice. Right? All of them were nice. We had them choose from 14 very nice traits and characteristics, and we said, just choose as many as you would like to choose of the 14, no limit. Okay, this is what we found. There were exactly 3 traits that were chosen more than 50% of the time. These are them. Knows the business and the industry, engaged and present, communicates effectively. These were the 3 that more than 50% of the respondents chose relative to the CEO. I'd like to show you the next 3. Here are the next 3. Shows empathy, humility, and listens, 49%. I will be honest, I was surprised it was that high. 49% demonstrates honesty. I was a little surprised it was that low. And then 35% manages performance effectively. This, by the way, I think is kind of a fascinating metric. I've presented this data to CEOs, and I had one CEO who said, well, that's not really my job. I was like, that's fascinating. Does your board of directors agree with that? Do your NEDs agree with that? Well, it's really the job of my executive team. It's fascinating how actually different roles define what managing performance is and how they engage with that. My favorite, 2%. None of the above. 14 perfectly nice characteristics. 2% said, what else have you got? Because none of these are working for me. Okay? Fortunately, it was only 2%. What was fascinating, however, is I will say, this is the overall sample. Now, let's please have a look at what happens when you split this by high and low performer. Definitively, a significant difference in high and low performing. When we look at the traits where high and low performers did better, the high performers, the dark blue bars are high performers, the light blue bars are low performing enterprises. Every single characteristic that popped to the top by a difference of 20 percentage points or more had to do with people leadership and performance management. Please look at the difference on performance management, 48% versus 24%. Right? So significant differences where these CEOs are people leaders. Now, of course, as a CIO, you cannot change your CEO. This is not one of your action items in leaving this conference, right? Is to change your particular CEO. That's not in your job description. But I think it's important to be aware that this is a place where for some CEOs, you may have to look at your complementary skills and say, you know what, I am a good people leader. And so this is a place where I can perhaps complement my CEO and bring a strength because the greatest teams have complementary strengths. And if, for example, your CEO does not believe that managing performance is necessarily at the top of their things to do, then you have to be really clear about how you are managing performance and make sure that you're in agreement on certain key things like performance metrics. You may have to be much more proactive than a CIO in a high-performing organization. We also asked about negative personality traits. So in a different question, we were a little less nice. And we said, please rate your CEO according to, are they closer to these positive traits, conscientious, agreeable, stable, and open, or to unreliable, disagreeable, neurotic, and closed off? I want you to picture your own CEO. Imagine your CEO. Where would you score them? This is how they scored. Now, on the good news side, 80% of respondents primarily associated their CEOs with positive traits. 20% associated them with negative traits. Now, of course, the important question is, so what? Can you be disagreeable as a CEO and have high performance? What do you think? Some of you are saying, no, you cannot. I'm seeing that some of you go like, maybe. Let's see. This is us splitting the data into the dark blue bars are the high performers and how they rated each characteristic, and the light blue are low performers and how they rated each characteristic. These were the percentage of negative traits. So as you can see, yes, it's possible to have higher performance when you have some of the negative traits, but there's definitely a strong correlation between low performance and negative traits. The more negative traits your CEO has, the higher the likelihood of negative performance. Right? Again, if you're dealing with a CEO who has some of these negative traits, again, not your job to fix the CEO, change the CEO, but it is in many ways your job to deal with it and figure out ways of managing it. For some of these CEOs, the negative behaviors are episodic, so it becomes your job to figure out, all right, when are they in a bad mood? When are they in a good mood? Our best CIOs are often very attentive and very empathetic. So for example, I had one CIO who told me that he would walk into his CEO's office and he knew that the CEO was in a bad mood if the CEO had his shoes on. If the CEO had his shoes off, it meant that he was relaxed and approachable. But if the shoes were on, the CIO would turn around and leave. This was not a good time to engage with the CEO. So as a CIO, you sometimes have to become that detective to say when is the best time to approach and when is the better time to walk away to create influence. So how does this impact the overall ELT dynamic? So functional organizations, this was interesting. We asked the ELT members a variety of different questions. To what degree did they agree with each of these statements? And what we found was that in high-performing organizations, the executive leadership team felt more genuine and they felt more psychological safety. Right? What you see here in the numbers, and you'll see this throughout the rest of the presentation, that the 18 percentage points shows the percentage difference between high performers and low. So that's the percentage difference in the responses. So they were 18 percentage points more likely to feel comfortable with themselves, 20% more likely to feel valued, and 24% more likely to raise concerns about difficult subjects. As a team, as a whole, they felt more comfortable dissenting, responding to feedback, and asking for help. Okay? Most importantly, significant difference that when a mistake happened, the immediate response of the team in a high-performing company was to learn. What do you think the response is in a low-performing ELT? If we make a mistake, the first response is to blame. Blame. So people feel less comfortable pointing out either their own mistakes or others, and we don't help each other as a team. So if this dynamic is happening in your organization, please be sensitive to how you can support other members of the ELT. It may be outside of the presence, of the CEO. It could be in the presence of the CEO because your organization's under pressure. And if you're feeling economically stressed, if you're feeling the competition, this kind of tension is more likely to happen. And so we have to be more sensitive to making sure that we're having the open, real discussions so we can solve the real problems. Similarly, as part of learning, there was an interesting difference between the degree to which executive teams invested in executive education. Note, spending enough time in learning, 57 to 16. Significant difference between high performers and low performers. Helping each other grow individual strengths, 38 to 16. And then interestingly, when we asked them how you learn, mentors, conferences, the interesting biggest difference, which had the highest impact, was actually taking a course to develop a new skill. When I did case studies related to this, what was fascinating was the greatest amount of learning seemed to be happening in smaller growing organizations where the executive team was new, and so they were constantly training, constantly learning. But what was rather remarkable is that even in executive teams of much larger organizations who had a great deal of tenure, they were heavily investing in learning. and it was leading to high performance. So it matters tremendously, regardless of the age of the company or the tenure of the team. For low-performing executive teams, accountability is worse at every level, at every possible level. So there's managing performance, and then there's holding each other accountable. 18 percentage point difference on responding to feedback and criticism, 21 on CEO holds us accountable. And note, one of the most disturbing for me was, because I focused so heavily on organizational politics, 26 percentage point difference on the ELT is held to high standards of behavior. Right? Very concerning relative to the dynamic. We hold each other accountable, and then 39 percentage point difference on the CEO holds everyone in the ELT to the same standards of accountability and performance. I consistently hear this from CIOs. CIOs are often concerned with this. If you have this concern, you're held to 99.9% reliability, right? Marketing will have a totally disastrous campaign. The CEO will go, okay, better luck next time, right? CIOs in particular have this challenge where we have to set appropriate expectations about what appropriate levels of success look like in IT. Because we are in IT, things break, we're moving quickly. Not everything is perfect. And sometimes it's actually difficult for the perfectionists who tend to lead IT to express that in a way that the CEO can hear it. But it's incredibly important, right, given the criticality of IT. And how do their skills and capabilities vary? We asked what types of approaches you take to disruption. How do you handle an extreme disruption? Goodness knows we've had plenty of those. This is the difference between high and low performers. Again, high performers, the navy blue bar, low performers, the bright blue bar, the lighter blue. Huge difference. For the high performers, 44%, we analyze data to deal with the disruption. Low performers, 22%. Please look at the alternatives for the low performers. 23%, we have no set approach to dealing with the disruption. We kind of wing it. Do we say that here in Europe? Like we wing it, right? We don't have a particular approach. 22%, we defer to the CEO. The CEO deals with it, makes the final decision. In the research that we've done relative to dysfunction, this was an interesting theme that came up over and over and over again. That executive leadership teams that deferred to the CEO frequently performed worse. Now, this didn't mean that members of the executive team, such as yourselves, were simply stepping back and saying, you decide, to the CEO. It often meant that either the CEO had a controlling style, had a micromanaging style where they insisted on making these decisions, or it could have meant that it was a newer team that wasn't quite ready to make some of the most difficult decisions. The reasons varied. But when we actually look at their approach to risk, an incredibly high value topic at this moment in time with NEDs, with ELTs, radical differences in risk. High performers were significantly better at dealing with risk. Note, 38 percentage point difference. We take appropriate level of risk to stay ahead of the competition. And CIOs are in the center of risk management and risk strategies right now. Right? You are at the center of dealing with cyber risk, generative AI, all kinds of threats. You are in the center of this. So this is a place where we expect CIOs to lead and help their executive leadership teams have the right data to manage risk and to help them deal with it in a healthy way. We also looked at how well do executive teams deal with adaptation and execution on strategy. Not surprisingly, low performers were much less adaptable and less agile. They could not adjust the strategy to changing environmental conditions. They had difficulty stopping initiatives that were not working. They had difficulty moving money to initiatives that were working. So the level of adaptability was fairly low. And in particular, they had difficulty seeking out new opportunities. Again, this is a place where CIOs can play a tremendous role in using data to point out, here's where we have some opportunities, here's where we may want to make some adjustments, and very importantly, many of these opportunities are technology-centric, right? So you will be at the center of many of these opportunities. There was also an interesting significant difference in how high and low performers handled conflict and influence. We asked, and this will actually show, the light blue bars are the first choice. What they chose is the first choice, and then the navy blue is the sum of the top three. Sum of the top three. How do we handle conflict? The number one answer was we listen to all points of view and then we decide. The second, we gather as much data as possible and ask a thorough set of questions. But there were also some interesting challenges here. 15% of respondents said conflicts are typically ignored or simply not resolved. Not an indicator of high functioning. And 27% said we have a clear set of decision frameworks. Again, 29%, our CEO makes the final decision. When we split this by high and low performing, a few key findings came out. In dysfunctional ELTs, they are much more likely to say conflicts are ignored or not resolved. They were 15 percentage points more likely to say the CEO makes the decision on their own. In high performers, they're more likely to say we gather data, we ask questions, and we have frameworks. We have methodologies which help us facilitate decision making. So if you have an executive team which is struggling a bit in resolving conflict, introduce wherever you can appropriate levels of data and determine which will actually influence the right players. Are there frameworks you can use to say, wait, which problem are we trying to solve? So it doesn't become personal. Then we also asked, what drives influence? What drives influence? What determines how influential you are as a member of the executive team? And again, this is the first choice is light blue. The top three are navy blue. The number one choice overall was relationship to the CEO. Please keep that in mind when I show you the split in just a moment of high and low performers. The number one overall was delivery of business results. And we looked at other factors such as expertise, your communication skills, your tenure, a variety of different characteristics. When we split this by high and low, this is what we found. Dysfunctional ELTs are much more influenced by what I refer to as political criteria. Political criteria, and this is what I mean by that. Relationship to the CEO was the number one determinant of influence. They were more likely to say my tenure in the company or in the ELT matters, and they were 22% more likely to say that the CEO influence was the most important. Let's look at the high performers. High performers, business results were number one. Relationship to the CEO, 5. When we looked at the other differentiators, 18 percentage points more important than internal tenure was external reputation. Are you a force in the industry? Are you known in the industry? Actually translated into respect inside the executive team. And 18 percentage points more likely to say communication skills. What are they communicating about? Business results. So, one of the most important models, frameworks, tools, and data sets for you to have, business value. How do you contribute to the things that matter most? Revenue, making more money today than we had yesterday. Cost, helping to manage the bottom line and save money and be efficient. And number 3, risk. Are we secure? Are we compliant? Is the brand protected? And are we being innovative where we need to be innovative? Your business value framework is a powerful tool of influence in the best of executive teams. So a few recommendations. If you've looked at this data and you've said, I think we might be a little more on the dysfunctional side of the equation as an executive team, absolutely invest in a good relationship with the CEO, but don't over-index on it, right? Don't over-index. Data is your most powerful tool. Right? So in teams that are not accustomed to dealing with data on a regular basis, introduce small, appropriate amounts of data that you feel they can consume, that they can learn to adapt to, and find the data that they find most influential. More is not better. It's feeling around to find what's the right data that will influence your team. Invest in executive education to challenge yourself, and very importantly, take care of yourself and others. Being in an ELT in the best of cases is stressful. And when it's dysfunctional, it's even more stressful. So it's critically important to take care of yourself and your team. If you're on the more functional side of the equation, recognize what you do best and protect it. As new members come in and out of your team, take their best practices, take their learnings, but don't ever forget what principles, concepts, frameworks, and behaviors and standards work best for you. We don't want you to become complacent, right? Success breeds complacency. The strongest executive teams that I've worked with frequently have a high level of skill, in many cases, very long tenure, but they continue learning, they continue relying on data, which is what you broker in. They're relentless about using data to make high-quality decisions quickly. And we see it translated in business performance. So I hope this has given you a few things to think about relative to the dynamic of your executive team, and I hope it also underscores what a critical role you have to play in it going forward. Thank you so much for being here for this session. I hope you enjoy the rest of the event. Thank you very much. Thank you.